All right, let's in fact welcome our guest this evening joining us here on the program, Pinak Chakravarty, ex-Secretary MEA, J.K. Tripathi, former ambassador, Deepak Vora, former ambassador, Col Dinny, defense analyst, and Major General Ashwini Siwach, defense expert, joining us here on the Urban Debate. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us and for sparing your time. I would like to begin with Mr. Pinak Chakravarty. Ambassador Chakravarty, you know, the number of narratives now that are coming up, but I want to begin by asking you that Shinzo Abe was, of course, the longest-serving minister of Japan. Apparently, some amount of anti-Abe public opinion did exist, as it now comes out, including certain dissatisfaction on some of his policies. But the question here is, how strong was that defense really? Because is this case a clear indication that there was a failure in sort of detecting that dissent, in identifying it, intel failure, you think, or you think this is a clear case of a security breach?
Well, firstly, I think whatever policies the late PM Abe followed did create a debate. There is no doubt about it, including his proposals for amending the post-war constitution, which was imposed on Japan by the US occupation forces, and also his economic policies, which were three-pronged. It was monetary, fiscal, and structural changes in the Japanese economy, and it succeeded in raising Japan's growth rate and GDP. But I think that is probably not the issue on which there would have been too much difference. But the other one certainly created differences within people, within society, and even within their parties. But to say that this was that democratic debate was so vicious or so visceral that it should lead to somebody killing Prime Minister Abe is, I think, beyond my imagination. I don't think that is possible. It was a personal thing that this guy did, and he is an ex-Navy person. So obviously he had some issues on which he disagreed, because there is no personal enmity. And this man, there was no intelligence that there was this plot or anything to kill the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister. And he was standing there openly with his gun hanging from his neck, which looked like a camera. So I think people got misled. But if you were to press me and say, who would you blame? I'm going to point my finger at the security arrangement, because it was an open space, a street corner, where he was talking to people for the election campaign. That is probably normal in Japan, and there were a few security people, but I don't think they were watching carefully or even taking stock of the situation. I think they were completely unprepared and taken by surprise that such a thing could happen. And I think that is what really happened. There was obviously no intelligence. If there was intelligence, more precautions could have been taken. Yes. So I think that is where I would rest and sort of say, that's my view.
Yes. Major General Ashwini Siwach, on the point of security breach, do you agree with what Ambassador Pinak had to say? Because the fact is that former prime ministers do get a certain protocol when it comes to security cover. In fact, in the United States, perhaps it's at the same level as the current president. But in case of Japan, is it any different? Do you also agree that it was possible that he did not get the kind of security cover that a former prime minister should get? He was easily accessible, as we saw in those pictures. From close range, he was shot at. How did the person get this kind of access if he did have the security cover?
Absolutely. See, as far as Shinzo Abe that is concerned, I will say that it is a complete stroke lapse. The thing that happened, it shows, that the stroke was very real. No action taken, the SOPs are not there, protocols are not there, no overt intelligence failure. You see, that point is that it's not a question of that. Basically, Japan a peaceful society, and there is no question of anyone trying to use force against the ex-prime minister. After all, he is convincing, and he is the ex-prime minister. He has some. Why your intelligence not able to appreciate that? Why some overt action and covert action not taken? So the point is, you have taken things for granted. Now you have allowed a situation to build up the way it has built up. I feel that it's a complete failure on security, and it needs to be tightened up. I'm sure in future they will make a strong speed on security. You cannot say how is the public, how is they going to react. You have to analyze yourself. Where was your intelligence? Why have you not analyzed it? In case this individual has come so close to Shinzo Abe, and
Yes.
he has fired very close range, you are not even covering your prime minister. He is basically exposed, and thereafter the action which has been taken was also not to the best of it what Japan was to take. So I suppose somewhere they were overconfident. They never thought it would take place, and that's why their SOP.
You're saying that there is a sense of complacency in a country like Japan, since the crime rate is low, gun violence is unheard of. Do you agree, Colonel Dinny, with this observation? And we played out the figures. It's practically impossible to get a weapon in Japan without having cleared at least 4 to 5 levels of scrutiny. So here again is a man who managed to perhaps, create a handmade weapon for the purpose. So that was the level of determination here to eliminate Shinzo Abe.
Absolutely. I completely agree with General Siwach when he says that there was a sense of complacency. And once you watch the videos very closely, there is another video which was there on social media in which both the shots were clearly being shown. And to my surprise and to my horror, I saw the close bodyguards who were supposed to be looking in a 360-degree angle. Both those close bodyguards were looking in the same direction as was Mr. Shinzo Abe. So after the first shot was fired, by the time the next shot was being fired, even Mr. Shinzo Abe turned and had a look behind it who is firing, and that is the time when these close bodyguards were able to actually show their presence. By the time the gunman had already fired the second shot, and that's how he got shot and he was there. So it's actually completely totally an unprofessional kind of approach which they had, the kind of protection which they were giving to the former prime minister. Especially he is a person who has taken some strong stand in the recent past. He was the person who has brought that samurai spirit back into the Japanese society. So there is bound to be people within the society and outside Japan who may not agree with this complete this kind of thinking. So there would be some sort of intelligence appreciation done that what kind of threat did the former prime minister have, and yet if they could not give him a protection, I think it's a complete and for a country like Japan who works on such professionalism, it was actually, I think, one complacency, which is again, you would have seen that when the gunman was brought down, even then there were people who were going on cycles and as if nothing happened. They were taken by shock that how could such a thing happen. So I think it's a combination of all these things which led to this kind of incident in which the gunman was allowed to come so close, almost point blank range, and he was able to take down the former prime minister.
Yes, Ambassador Vora, do you agree? Your comments on this? First, of course, the failure to assess the threat perception, then the issue of security cover not being adequate, quite lackluster from what we could see for a former prime minister and a dignitary.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Always a pleasure to be on Mirror Now to learn from you. And the complaint is that you have such brilliant people on the panel that I feel intimidated. Their knowledge is much higher than mine. Thank you nevertheless.
Go ahead, sir.
Whenever there is an issue like this, somebody is attacked, the first thing we say is, was it a security lapse? Of course it was, otherwise the fellow wouldn't be dead. Whenever there is a problem, there's a pothole on the road, I fall into it, whose fault is it? The roads or mine? I wasn't looking carefully enough. Let me just begin on a personal note with your gracious permission. I had met him thrice, I'd heard him speak when he came to India. Today, we are all Japanese. Yasuraka ni nemuru, Abe-san, rest in peace. We've declared one day's national mourning. He was a colossus. He was a samurai, as Colonel Saab said. A doer, not just a speaker, a great friend of India, that he saw us as the most effective counter in our region to public enemy number one, which is China. I saw his successor, the present Prime Minister, crying, almost crying when he spoke, said it was barbaric and malicious. So while we can attribute as much as we want to security, further investigation will reveal if there was a conspiracy. And if there was a conspiracy, was there an international element? Who would gain by eliminating him? He was a great son of Japan and an outstanding citizen of the world. How did the shooter get hold of the gun? Well, they now say he made it himself. As you rightly pointed out, it's probably easier to manufacture some kind of massive explosive device in Japan than to buy, I mean, I'm being facetious, than to buy a gun. It's just not possible. You have to go through mental checks, you have to go through health checks, all kinds of funny things. This seems to have been a homemade double-barreled gun. Abe-san was a man of the people. Even when he was in India, if there were people hanging around who stretched out their hands wanting to touch him or shake hands, he would just walk across and shake hands with them. And we've seen this in India also, ma'am. We've lost a former prime minister who reached out to greet a lady, and then she blew herself up, and the former prime minister also died. So it becomes very difficult. It's easy to say this, when the event has happened, as we say, ex post facto. But at that point of time, here's a man, here's a protected former prime minister who says, no, but look, I want to talk to the people. You can't keep me away from the people. But that's probably what has happened. He was very, very popular. At the same time, his attempt to tell his people, the people of Japan, that you cannot depend on anybody else for your security, you have to depend on yourself.
There will be some hard lessons learned, absolutely. Ambassador Tripathi, the point that Ambassador Vora was making also is with regards to who would benefit from it, who would gain out of it, who is to gain by eliminating Shinzo Abe?
You see, I have 2 points. First, I agree with all the speakers that there was a security breach, because as far as my knowledge goes, in Japan, the former prime ministers are given 4 security personnel. And in this one, they were not enough or they were complacent, as others have said. Secondly, now that you are asking who is likely to gain. See, which country or which organization was it who Shinzo Abe criticized most? That is China, undoubtedly. Because in his first avatar, he conceptualized Quad, but which could not take off because of the Australian disinterest. But later on, it not only took off, but it proved to be a very potent threat to China, because every time there was a talk about Quad, China used to react very vehemently. Now, you see now why I say China. First is it is not a purely local or lone wolf thing, because there is a strict gun control in Japan, as you had stated.
Yes.
Then not only that, the police is supposed to have raided this fellow's Yamatami's this murderer's residence and found explosives there, which is again illegal. And then how could these explosives have been there is a question of interrogation. So my idea is that it was not lone wolf, it was some organization, some people backed by some other country, some foreign power. And you see, after Sinzo Abe's murder, in China, there had been a spate of messages on social media celebrating his murder. First. Secondly, so far, Chinese chairman, that is Xi Jinping, has not given any reaction. Whatever reaction has come, it has come from the person of the Foreign Office, who said that it is shocking, but it should not be related to the differences that China and Japan have. So
Okay.
you can put two and two together, and then you can guess which country should it be.
Let's have others react to this, because you're making some very interesting statements and I'm sure this would evoke a very strong response. I'll start with Ambassador Pinak Chakravarty again. Your reaction to what we just heard: there's a possibility of a foreign hand. There wasn't that kind of domestic dissent against Shinzo Abe. China's reaction is interesting. There's a Chinese media reaction, which I was reading, that says that you cannot rule out. It calls it a political incident. Possibility cannot be ruled out that the shooting was out of a political purpose.
Well, I think it's too early to jump to these conclusions, and only the investigations will point the fingers at a conspiracy, if any, whether it was domestic, whether it had an international dimension. But one fact remains, and we all know that Mr. Shinzo Abe was disliked by China. There is no doubt about that. Because Mr. Abe, in his vision, wanted to change Japan into a military power. It is already an economic power, and China didn't like it. China and Japan have a very bitter historical relationship from before the Second World War, when Japan had occupied large parts of China. And there were atrocities and there were human rights abuses. So I think China also has been claiming certain islands. So things were not going very well for these two countries in terms of their relationship. And Mr. Shinzo Abe was particularly, conscious of this fact. And that is why he came up with this concepts of the Indo-Pacific and the Quad and things like that. And he realized that India would have to play a very large role in this counterbalancing of China, as we call it. So I think this is the background. But to say that there was a direct hand of China, I think is quite premature. And
Okay.
I think we should wait for the investigation, and they will tell us who was behind this conspiracy.
Yes, on the China hand, if I can get a reaction from the others as well. Colonel Dinny, where do you stand on this? The possibility of a foreign hand being involved in it, since, like we said, the crime rate in the country, gun violence, very low. Could this have been instigated by any foreign force?
At the moment, I do agree with, Ambassador Pinak. It's too early to predict exactly, who could be behind this. But at the same time, there are certain questions which does, merit our attention. Mr. Shinzo Abe was one of the first early movers, if I can put it, to understand that China was a threat. His second tenure from 2012 to 2020. And by about 2013, he had made Japan's first national security strategy. And 2013 was the time when Xi Jinping also had taken over China. And from there on, I think if one person was advocating the maximum for rule-based order, I think it was Mr. Shinzo Abe. And that manifested in the Quad and such other arrangements which we are seeing today. So China definitely has a grudge, and a huge grudge, against Mr. Shinzo Abe. So there's no doubt in that. But also, like earlier it was mentioned, that who benefits the maximum. I don't think at this moment there is, even although there is a political, differences within Japan, that can lead to such a drastic measure. Even if a person has such a big grudge against him, there is allegations of his being, there are the killer said that Mr. Shinzo Abe is aligned to some organization and such like things. I don't think that can be, of course, human beings can behave in a different manner, but at this moment it looks illogical to believe that a person will, do something like this. So there are questions which need to be answered. I think in the time frame as we move ahead, we will definitely get those answers, is what I understand.
The fact of the matter is, we can only speculate what the provocation was, what the motive was. It's absolutely unclear. There's absolutely no official report on why this person, a 41-year-old man, shot at Shinzo Abe from close range. We do not know at the moment. We can, like I said, only speculate on the motive. Therefore, let's turn to the other important issue on how the reactions have poured in, the tributes have poured in from the leadership in India and across the world. But most reactions from India, from the top leadership, has been centered around one point, that Shinzo Abe was a friend of India, invested in infrastructure projects, was interested in collaborating on a number of those projects, and therefore it's a loss for us. Let's have Ambassador Tripathi please comment on this. The fact that, what would be the possible fallout? Would there be repercussions in Indo-Japan ties?
Well, I don't think, Archana, there will be any repercussions, because the relations between any two countries are made not strictly on the basis of the heads of the government, but on the basis of the national policies, their foreign policies. And foreign policies in democracies are always based on the national interest, which very seldom changes in democracies. And now Japan is being governed by the new prime minister, who is of the same party. And in India, Prime Minister Modi is still there in seat. So that means there shouldn't be any change in foreign relations, between the bilateral relations between the two countries. And I think policies initiated by Shinzo Abe would be carried out by his successor as regards relations with India.
Okay. Yes, interesting. Okay, carry on. Finish your point, sir.
So that is, irrespective of whichever leader comes, even a leader from an opposition party comes, if the national interests of the two countries, India and Japan, converge, then there is no need to worry for us about the direction the relations will take after Shinzo Abe's death.
Okay, there should be no impact on the direction that Indo-Japan ties are at the moment. Even so, of course, reactions are pouring in thick and fast. A lot of tributes coming in from across the world. He was a popular global leader, no doubt about that. General Siwach, your thoughts on, what could be the influence on the world order, so to speak? Is there a possibility that with the Abe era coming to an end, with somebody like Shinzo Abe, who clearly had a lot of influence in the global politics as well, what are your thoughts on how that will be impacted?
We have to understand that as on Shinzo Abe was minister, it was Fumio Kishida. But having said so, one must understand this Indo-Pacific strategy which has been made one of the architects, Shinzo Abe. He is the one who started off in 2008 again that Quad should be revitalized, and he brought out that the Indo-Pacific should be free, open, and inclusive with three guiding principles: freedom of navigation, food-based international order, sharing territorial integrity and sovereignty of all nations, including minor islands. It was Sinzo Abe which has challenged the hegemony of basically China. He has shown their stand even in East China Sea as far as the Sankaku Islands are concerned. So therefore, Sinzo Abe was a towering personality, and he was the instrument in making the Quad functional, and also Malabar exercise taking place. And that is why the China always see the Quad as a so once he...
There's a bit of an interruption in your audio. Apologies for that. Ambassador Vora, the fact is that he was the architect of Quad, and things were really moving in a certain direction, much because of the initiatives of Shinzo Abe, many would believe. Do you think that that could get derailed? And how will India be impacted if it does?
I entirely agree with what Ambassador J.K. Tripathi has said when he hinted that some people, particularly those who were offended by the Quad, would have been fairly happy to see Shinzo Abe removed from the scene. They were unhappy with his geopolitical vision of a brave, new, democratic, prosperous world, free of violence, intimidation, coercion, terrorism. When he was in India, he talked about this. He understood that the China dream had soured, and the world, including his own country, had made a mistake, he said so at a media briefing, in helping China grow and become so powerful that China began to try and shape the world in its own image. He also understood that the best alternative for China was India. given India's labor force, given India's warm relationship with each of the other members of the Quad, given India's role, India's international respect, its growing stature, he knew that only India is a reliable alternative for China with the labor force, et cetera, to be able to replace the Chinese. As far as the impact on our bilateral relationship is concerned, ma'am, the brand equity that India enjoys in Japan, and I'm not just talking about the Buddhist element. You can see that virtual image behind me of a cluster of pagodas in Nara, the city where he was shot. The brand equity is very, very deep, whether it's commercial or cultural or political, even military. Remember, after the Second War, we did not ask Japan to pay reparations, something that is very deeply appreciated. So let me just say that Shinzo Abe is gone. Abeism will survive and will live for a long time.
That's, I think, an excellent note to end the program with. Abeism will live on. His legacy lives on. Of course, the world now will wake up to many of the policies that has helped global politics because of Shinzo Abe's initiatives. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Pinak, Chakravarty, J.K. Tripathi.